I never thought I'd be the kind of father who had to destroy his own family to save his son. But the day I walked into my lake house and saw my daughter-in-law in another man's arms, something inside me went quiet. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I made one phone call instead, and that single call unraveled secrets none of them were prepared for. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube. I have always believed that silence reveals more than anger ever could. Anger is loud, it shakes the room, it demands attention. But silence listens. Silence gathers truth. The lake house was supposed to be my refuge. I bought it 32 years ago, back when my son Daniel was just 8 years old and still believed I could fix anything. The place sits at the edge of Stillwater Lake, surrounded by tall pine trees that whisper when the wind rolls in from the north. I built the dock with my own hands. I taught Daniel how to fish there. I watched him fall in love with the world from that porch. And I thought one day I'd watch his children run across that same wooden deck. That Friday afternoon, I hadn't planned on going up there. I was supposed to be at the office reviewing quarterly reports. But something felt off. A strange restlessness settled in my chest. I told my assistant I needed air and drove the 2 hours north without telling anyone. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't call his wife Emily. I just drove. The sun was low when I pulled into the gravel driveway. I remember noticing a car I didn't recognize parked beside the house. A dark blue sedan, clean, expensive, out of place. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a neighbor, maybe a contractor, maybe Daniel had sent someone up to fix something. But Daniel was in Chicago that weekend, he told me himself. Business conference, 3 days. The front door wasn't locked. I stepped inside and heard laughter, not the kind of polite laughter you share at dinner, not the kind that floats lightly through a room. This was intimate laughter. The kind that belongs in a bedroom. I knew before I walked down that hallway. I don't know how to explain it, but when you've lived long enough, when you've built a life brick by brick, you develop an instinct for collapse. The bedroom door was slightly open, and there she was, Emily, my son's wife of 6 years, her hair falling over her bare shoulders, her hand pressed against the chest of a man I had never seen before. They were tangled together in sheets I had chosen myself 20 years ago. For a moment, the world did not shatter. It went quiet. No shouting in my ears, no racing heartbeat, just stillness. They didn't see me at first. I watched them the way a judge might observe a courtroom, calm, detached, gathering facts. Then the man turned his head. Our eyes met. That was when Emily noticed me. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. She pulled the sheet up to her chest, stammering something I didn't bother to hear. I didn't ask questions. I didn't yell. I didn't look at her the way an outraged father-in-law might. Instead, I nodded once, and I closed the door. I walked back down the hallway, each step measured. The wooden floor didn't creak. It was as if even the house understood this was not a moment for noise. Outside, the lake was still. I stood on the dock for a long time. You might think I was deciding whether to tell Daniel, but that decision had already been made the second I saw her. What I was deciding was how. Because there are truths that destroy, and there are truths that protect. Daniel loved her, blindly, fiercely, the way young men love when they believe they've found forever. He trusted her with everything, his heart, his home, his future children, and his last part. That had always worried me. Daniel works in my company. I built it from nothing after his mother passed away. Construction, property development, private investments. It took decades of sleepless nights to create stability. Everything I built for him. But over the past year, I'd noticed discrepancies, small transfers, adjustments in joint accounts. Nothing illegal, Nothing obvious, just enough to make an old man curious. Emily handled most of their personal finances. She was organized, polished, charming. Too charming, perhaps. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over Daniel's name. I imagined his voice answering, the disbelief, the denial, the way love makes fools of even the smartest men. No, this required precision. So I scrolled further down my contacts, and I pressed call. "Robert," I said when he answered, "I need you to freeze all shared asset accounts connected to Daniel and Emily immediately, and I need a full audit, quietly." Robert has been my lawyer for 27 years. He didn't ask questions. He simply said, "Understood." That was the phone call. Not to my son, not to the police, not even to the man's wife, to my lawyer. Because betrayal of the heart is painful, but betrayal of trust and money, that can ruin a life. I wasn't just looking at an affair in that bedroom. I was looking at a pattern, and I intended to uncover it all. Behind me, the lake house door opened. I could hear hurried footsteps on gravel. Emily calling my name, her voice trembling now. I turned slowly, and in her eyes I didn't see guilt. I saw fear, and that told me everything I needed to know. Emily's voice cracked as she called my name, but I didn't answer her right away. I watched the ripples in the lake instead. The water had always calmed me. Even the day I buried my wife, I came here afterward and sat on this very dock until the stars came out. Grief, like betrayal, needs space to settle. If you react too quickly, you drown in it. "Please," Emily said, stepping closer. I could hear her bare feet pressing into the gravel. "It's not what it looks like." I finally turned to face her. There's something almost fascinating about how predictable those words are. "It's not what it looks like," as if there's some alternate explanation for two people tangled in a bed that doesn't belong to them. "I didn't ask what it looks like," I said quietly. She swallowed. Up close, I could see her hand shaking. She had thrown on one of Daniel's old sweatshirts. It hung loose on her frame. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Does Daniel know you're here?" she asked. That question was not about surprise. It was about risk assessment. "No," I replied. "He doesn't." Her shoulders lowered just slightly, a fraction of relief. And that confirmed my suspicion. This wasn't a mistake. This was strategy. The man from the bedroom stepped outside then. He had dressed quickly, but not quickly enough to hide the confidence in his posture. He was mid-30s, well-groomed, expensive watch, the kind of man who had never been told no. He extended his hand. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." I looked at his hand, but didn't take it. "No," I said calmly. "There hasn't." Silence stretched between us. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and lake water. For a brief second, I wondered if Daniel had ever stood in this same spot, imagining a future with her. I wondered if he had trusted her with the same ease he trusted me when he was a boy learning to swim. "Who are you?" I asked the man. "His name is Marcus. He's just a friend," Emily blurted out before he could speak. Marcus gave her a sideways glance. "Friends don't lock bedroom doors." I studied his face carefully, searching for something: guilt, arrogance, calculation. What I found was expectation, as if he believed this could be smoothed over, managed. "You should leave," I told him. He hesitated, then nodded. He didn't argue. That told me something else. This was not their first risk. As the car disappeared down the gravel road, I turned back to Emily. "I assume you have an explanation prepared," I said. Tears welled in her eyes instantly. They came too quickly, rehearsed. "It didn't mean anything. Daniel's been distant. He's always working. I felt alone." loneliness, that convenient justification for betrayal. Daniel works because he's building a life with you. She flinched at that. You don't understand. There's pressure from you, from the company, from expectations. He's not the same man I married. And there it was, deflection. When people are cornered, they reach for blame like a shield. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. How long? Her silence answered before her words did. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Holidays, dinners at my home, family gatherings where she smiled across the table at my son. And the money? I asked. Her eyes snapped up. That reaction was not about heartbreak. It was about exposure. I don't know what you mean, she said too quickly. I mean, I continued, the transfers, the adjustments, the quiet restructuring of joint accounts. Her breathing changed, so I was right. Daniel approved everything, she said defensively. Did he understand everything? I asked. She didn't answer. I had built my life around contracts and risk. I knew when numbers were being moved for convenience and when they were being moved for exit strategy. You were planning something, I said softly, weren't you? She hesitated, then nodded. She didn't argue. That told me something else. This was not their first risk. Were you planning to leave him? I asked. Tears fell freely now. I don't know. That's what people say when the answer is yes. I let the silence stretch again. Silence makes people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people reveal things. Finally, she whispered, Marcus has investors, opportunities. Daniel doesn't take risks. He plays it safe because of you. Ah, so this wasn't just emotional betrayal. It was ambition. A new life, a different future, possibly funded by the very assets my son believed were secure. Did you move money to him? No, she snapped, then softer. Not directly. Not directly, which meant indirectly. I nodded slowly. Emily, I said, and for the first time my voice carried weight. You are not afraid of losing Daniel. You are afraid of what I now know. Her face went pale again. I haven't told him, not yet. Her knees seemed to weaken at that. But understand something, I said quietly. The moment you decided to betray him, you underestimated one thing. She looked at me, desperate. You underestimated how much I protect my son. And I meant that. Not with fists, not with shouting, with foresight. Robert would already be reviewing everything, freezing accounts, tracking transfers, following digital trails she thought were subtle. This was no longer about catching someone in bed. This was about protecting a future. Emily sank onto the dock bench, crying openly now. But even through the tears, I could see calculation flickering behind her eyes. She was trying to measure how much damage I could do. The truth is, I hadn't even begun. As the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the lake, I made a decision. I would not confront Daniel with chaos. I would confront him with facts, and when I did, there would be no room left for doubt, because heartbreak heals, but financial ruin, that scars generations. I turned back toward the house. Go home, I told her. We'll talk soon. She didn't ask what that meant, and that told me she already feared the answer. I didn't stay at the lake house that night. I packed a small overnight bag, locked every door, and drove back to the city with the kind of focus I usually reserve for business negotiations. The sky was black and empty above the highway, and for the first time since I'd walked into that bedroom, I allowed myself to feel something other than calculation. It wasn't anger. It was grief. Not just for Daniel, but for the version of our family I thought we were building. When you lose a spouse young, like I did, you pour yourself into your child. Daniel became my purpose. I missed recitals. I missed a few baseball games, but I never missed being present when it mattered. I built my company so he'd never know instability, so he'd never feel the fear I felt when hospital bills piled up after his mother passed. And now, the one person he trusted most had turned that stability into leverage. Robert called me before I even reached the city. "I've frozen the joint investment accounts," he said without greeting. There were 3 significant transfers over the past 4 months, routed through an LLC. "Whose?" I asked. "Registered to a Marcus Hale." The name settled heavily in my chest. "How much?" I asked. He gave me the number. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to hurt, enough to set up a future, enough to suggest planning. "Was Emily's authorization clear?" I asked. "Yes," Robert said carefully. "But the documents are layered, complex. It would be easy to sign without understanding the structure." That sounded like Emily. She had always handled paperwork at family gatherings, tax forms, travel bookings, even small contracts Daniel would bring home absent-mindedly. She presented herself as helpful, efficient. Now I saw the pattern. "She's positioning for a divorce," Robert continued. "If she files, those funds complicate asset division." There it was, the quiet strategy beneath the sheets. "Keep digging," I told him, "and don't alert Daniel yet." "Are you sure?" Robert asked. "No," I answered honestly, "but I need the full picture first." When I pulled into my driveway, the house felt different, larger, colder. I walked through the silent rooms, remembering holidays where Emily laughed in this very kitchen. I remembered how she'd once hugged me and thanked me for raising such a good man. I almost admired the consistency of her performance. The next morning, Daniel came by unexpectedly. He looked tired but happy, conference badge still clipped to his jacket. "Hey, Dad," he said, stepping inside. "Thought I'd drop off those projections you wanted to see." I studied his face. He had no idea. There's something profoundly cruel about knowledge. When you hold it alone, you feel its weight in every interaction. "How was Chicago?" I asked casually. "Good," he said. "Productive. Met some investors. You'd like them." Investors. The word stung. "Did you speak to Emily?" I asked casually. He smiled. "Yeah, last night. She said she was relaxing at the lake house, said she needed quiet." Quiet. I felt something inside me harden. "Daniel," I said carefully, "how closely do you review the documents Emily gives you to sign?" He laughed lightly. "What kind of question is that? She's more detail-oriented than I am. I trust her." Trust. Such a fragile word. "And the LLC investments?" I asked. His smile faltered slightly. "What about them?" "You understand the structure." He hesitated. That was enough. "Daniel, what's going on?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. I walked to my office and retrieved a folder Robert had emailed over and I'd printed that morning. I placed it on the table between us, but didn't open it yet. "Before I say anything," I began, "I need you to answer one question honestly. If you discovered something painful about your marriage, would you want proof first or emotion?" He frowned. "Proof of what?" "Answer the question."
He looked unsettled now. "Proof," he said slowly. "Always proof." I nodded. "Good. Because what I was about to do would fracture something that could never be rebuilt the same way, but it would not be built on lies anymore." I opened the folder and slid the first document toward him. Transfer statements, LLC registration, Marcus Hale's name printed clearly. Daniel stared at it. "I've seen this," he said. "Emily explained. It's a growth opportunity, real estate flips." "With whose money?" I asked quietly. He looked at the figures more closely. Confusion replaced confidence. "I signed off on it," he said, almost defensively. "Yes, you did." He flipped through the pages, faster now. His breathing changed. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, voice tightening. Because the truth was coming, and it would not arrive gently. I leaned back in my chair and met his eyes. "Daniel," I said carefully, "I went to the lake house yesterday." His face softened slightly. "Oh, you should have told me. Emily said she wasn't alone." The room went silent. His expression froze, as if his mind refused to process the words. "What do you mean?" I didn't answer immediately. I let him sit with it, let the possibility form. Finally, I said, "I saw her with Marcus Hale." The color drained from his face the same way it had from hers. "That's not possible," he whispered. But I had learned something important in my lifetime. When truth is undeniable, denial only delays the inevitable. "I didn't confront them," I continued calmly. "I called my lawyer instead." His eyes snapped up at mine. "Why?" he demanded. "Because this isn't just about betrayal of the heart. It's about preparation." He stood abruptly, pacing now. "You're wrong," he muttered. "You must be. Emily wouldn't." "She moved money through him." Daniel stopped walking, and for the first time, doubt entered his eyes. Not because of the affair, but because of the money. Because deep down he knew he hadn't fully understood what he'd signed. And in that moment, I saw something break inside my son. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet crack in the foundation of trust he had built his life upon. And I realized then, this was only the beginning.
Daniel stood in the middle of my office like a man who had just been told the ground beneath him might not be solid. His hands were trembling, but he kept clenching and unclenching them as if trying to regain control over something, anything. "You saw them," he said again, this time not as denial, but as confirmation. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," I answered quietly. I wouldn't say it if I wasn't. He looked down at the documents scattered across my desk, the transfers, the LLC filings, Marcus Hale's name printed in ink that suddenly carried more weight than it had any right to. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 6 months, I replied. The words seemed to strike him physically. He sat down slowly like his legs could no longer hold him. 6 months. Half a year of dinners, shared beds, whispered plans about the future. I didn't speak. This was his moment to process. As a father, every instinct in me wanted to soften the blow, to say maybe there was some misunderstanding, maybe there was some explanation that would make this hurt less. But lies, even gentle ones, have a cost, and I had already seen enough deception for one lifetime. "She told me she felt alone," I said carefully, "that you were distant." Daniel let out a short, broken laugh. "I've been working 12-hour days to expand the firm, for us, for the life she said she wanted." He ran a hand through his hair, the same nervous gesture he had as a teenager before exams.
I trusted her, he said, with everything. I watched him closely. Pain was there, deep and raw, but beneath it, something else was surfacing. Anger. Not the loud kind, the focused kind. "What exactly did you see?" he asked. I told him, calmly, without embellishment. The bedroom, the sheets, the way Marcus had tried to shake my hand. Daniel closed his eyes when I described that part. "And you didn't confront them?" he asked. "No," I said. I confronted the situation. He looked at me, confusion mixing with grief. "I froze the accounts, had Robert begin a full audit." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "You did that already?" "Yes." For a moment, I wondered if he would resent me for stepping in, for taking action before consulting him. Instead, he nodded slowly. "Good," he said. That single word told me he understood. This wasn't just about infidelity, it was about intent. "Dad," about a long silence, he said, "how much did they move?" I told him. His jaw tightened. "That's not an accident," he muttered. "No," I agreed, "it's not." He stood again, pacing the room. "I need to talk to her," he said. "Yes, but not emotionally, not yet." He stopped and looked at me. "You think she was planning to leave me?" "I think she was positioning herself so that if she did, she would land comfortably." The truth hung between us like a storm cloud. Daniel walked to the window and stared out at the city skyline. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier. "Did she know you saw them?" "Yes." "And?" "She was afraid," I said carefully. "Not ashamed, afraid." That distinction mattered. Daniel turned back to me slowly. "I loved her. I still do." Of course he did. Love doesn't evaporate at the first sign of betrayal. It lingers, it argues, it pleads for alternative explanations. "I know," I said gently. "But I won't be made a fool," he added. And there it was, that shift, the line being drawn. I saw in him then not just my son, but the man he had become. Hurt, yes, but not broken. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. The question surprised me. "I don't want to control this. I want to protect you. The decision is yours." He was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "I want to see everything, every document, every transfer. I want the truth laid out so clearly that there's no room for excuses." I nodded. "That's wise." He gave a hollow smile. "I learned from you." There was pride in that moment, even amid the wreckage. "Call her," I said quietly. "Ask her to come here. Don't tell her why." His jaw tightened, but he pulled out his phone. I watched him as he dialed. "Hey," he said when she answered. His tone was controlled, almost normal. "Can you come to Dad's office? We need to go over something." Pause. "Now," he added. He ended the call and set the phone down carefully. "She's coming," he said. The next 30 minutes stretched endlessly. Daniel didn't sit. He didn't speak. He simply stood by the window, hands in his pockets, staring outward as if bracing himself. I prepared the documents neatly on the conference table, not as weapons, as evidence. When Emily finally arrived, she looked composed, too composed, but the moment she saw both of us together and the folder laid open between us, her expression faltered. "Daniel," she said softly, "what's going on?" He didn't answer right away. He walked to the table and placed his hand on the documents. "I know," he said simply. Her eyes flickered to me, and in that instant I saw the calculation return. "How much does he know?" she was measuring. "Enough," Daniel replied. She swallowed. About the lake house, he asked. Her face went pale. Or about the money, he continued. The silence was deafening, and for the first time since this began, I felt the full weight of what that one phone call had set in motion. There would be no quiet sweeping under the rug, no convenient misunderstandings, only truth and consequences. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but whatever she was about to say, it was already too late.
Emily looked from Daniel to me and back again, as if searching for a softer version of reality in our faces. She didn't find one. The room felt smaller somehow, the air heavier. I remained seated at the far end of the table, silent. This was no longer my confrontation, it was theirs, but I would witness it. "I can explain," she said finally, her voice trembling just enough to suggest vulnerability without surrender. Daniel didn't sit. He stood across from her, one hand resting on the back of a chair as though anchoring himself. "Start with the lake house," he said quietly. Her lips parted, but nothing came out at first. Then, "It wasn't supposed to happen like that." That sentence alone carried more truth than she realized. "So it was supposed to happen?" Daniel asked. She flinched. "It started as business," she said quickly. "Marcus introduced investment opportunities. You were too busy to review everything. I was trying to help us grow." Daniel glanced at the documents. "By sleeping with him?" Her composure cracked then. Tears welled up, spilling over as she shook her head. "It wasn't just that. You've been distant. Your father controls everything. I felt like I was living inside someone else's blueprint." There it was again, blame dressed up as confession. Daniel's voice remained steady. "So you decided to build your own blueprint, with my money." Silence. I watched her carefully, not with hatred, with assessment. "Did you move funds knowing you might leave me?" Daniel asked. She hesitated. That hesitation was louder than any admission. "I didn't know what I wanted," she whispered. "That's not what I asked." Her shoulders sagged. "Yes." The word fell like a stone into water. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. I saw the exact moment his heart shifted from hope to acceptance. "How much were you planning to move?" he asked. "All of it eventually," she said, barely audible. Even I hadn't expected that. Daniel let out a slow breath, the kind that signals the end of illusion. "Was there ever a point where you were going to tell me?" "I was trying to figure it out," she insisted. "Marcus said—" Daniel's head snapped up. "Marcus said?" She realized her mistake too late. "Marcus said you'd never leave your father's shadow, that you'd always play safe, that I deserved more." The room went still, not because of the insult, but because of the manipulation embedded inside it. Daniel's voice remained steady. "You discussed our marriage with him?" Her silence answered. I stood then, walking slowly toward the window, giving them space while still remaining present. I could feel Daniel's pain radiating through the room, but I also felt something else rising within him. Clarity. "You didn't just cheat," he said quietly. "You strategized." She sobbed openly now. "I was confused. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "It went exactly as far as you allowed it to go," Daniel replied. The steadiness in his voice made me proud and broke my heart at the same time. Emily turned to me suddenly. "You froze the accounts, didn't you?" "Yes," I answered. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said calmly. "Those funds were established under protective clauses tied to my estate structure. You should have read the fine print more carefully." Her face drained again. The confidence she had worn like armor began to crumble. "You trapped me," she whispered. "No," I said. "You trapped yourself." Daniel looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as the woman he loved, but as a person capable of deception. "Was any of it real? My marriage? Our plans?" She cried harder. "Yes, at first. I did love you." "At first?" he repeated. That was the final fracture. I stepped back toward the table and placed one more document in front of them, a summary from Robert outlining the transfers, the LLC ownership structure, and Marcus's percentage stake. "You weren't building a future with my son," I said quietly. "You were building leverage." She stared at the paper, defeated. "I never meant to hurt him," she whispered. "You don't accidentally reroute assets and share a bed for 6 months. The truth, once spoken aloud, leaves no room for denial." He straightened his posture then. The boy who once ran across my dock had disappeared. In his place stood a man who understood loss. "I want you to pack a bag," he said calmly. "You can stay with your sister." Her eyes widened. "Daniel," he continued, "I'll have my attorney contact yours. We'll proceed formally." The word formally carried weight. It meant documentation, evidence, boundaries. "You're divorcing me?" she asked, stunned. He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. The simplicity of it echoed through the room. She collapsed into the chair, sobbing. But even in her grief, I sensed calculation fading into fear. Not fear of losing him, fear of losing security. Daniel turned to me after a while. "Dad, thank you." I shook my head gently. "I didn't do this. I just refused to ignore it." He nodded. Emily stood slowly, wiping her face. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but morally diminished. "You never thought you'd turn against me," she said to me quietly. "I didn't," I replied. "You stepped away first." She left without another word. The door closed softly behind her. Daniel remained standing, staring at nothing. "Are you okay?" I asked. He took a long breath. "No," he said honestly, "but I will be." And in that moment, I realized something profound. My phone call hadn't destroyed my son's life. It had prevented a greater destruction later, because betrayal hidden becomes cancer. Betrayal exposed can heal. Daniel picked up the documents again, scanning them with new eyes. "I want everything uncovered," he said. "You will have it," I replied. Outside the window, the city moved on as if nothing had changed. But inside that office, a marriage had ended and a lesson had begun. The house felt different that evening. Daniel came home with me instead of returning to the apartment he once shared with Emily. He didn't say much during the drive. He stared out the passenger window, watching the city lights blur together, and I recognized that look. It was the same one he wore the night his mother died, the look of someone trying to understand how something permanent could disappear in a single day. When we stepped inside, I poured him a drink without asking. He accepted it without speaking. We sat across from each other in the living room, the same room where Emily had once curled up on that sofa during holidays, laughing at old family stories. "It's strange," Daniel said after a while. "I keep replaying everything. The dinners, the trips, the mornings. I'm trying to pinpoint the exact moment it stopped being real." "That's a dangerous exercise," I replied gently. "Why?" "Because it suggests it was never real, and that isn't always true." He looked at me. "People can love sincerely and still make calculated choices later.
The two are not mutually exclusive. He considered that. So she loved me and then decided I wasn't enough? Or decided she wanted something else more, I said. He nodded faintly. I keep thinking about the money, he admitted slowly. Not because of the amount, but because of what it means. She planned. Yes, I said quietly. Planning is the part that wounds deepest. Affairs born from impulse are chaotic and selfish, but affairs tied to financial repositioning, those are deliberate. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Did you ever doubt Mom? The question caught me off guard. No, I answered honestly, not once. How did you know? I smiled faintly. Because trust is not just what someone says, it's how they behave when no one is watching. Your mother never moved in secrecy. He absorbed that. I feel stupid, he said. No, I corrected. You feel betrayed. That's different. Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't as heavy as before. The initial shock had passed. What remained was sober clarity. My phone buzzed then. It was Robert. I stepped into my office to take the call. There's more, he said. My instincts sharpened instantly. Go on. The LLC wasn't just receiving transfers from Daniel's accounts. It was leveraged against projected inheritances. My jaw tightened. Explain. She used estate documentation from your trust filings to suggest future capital backing. It wasn't illegal, but it was misleading. I closed my eyes briefly. Emily hadn't just been moving current assets, she had been signaling future ones, using my life's work as collateral for her escape plan. Was Marcus aware? I asked. Yes, emails confirm it. That confirmed the partnership. How exposed are we? I asked. Minimal now that accounts are frozen, but had this gone another 6 months, substantial. I thanked him and ended the call. When I returned to the living room, Daniel looked up immediately. What? He asked. I didn't sugarcoat it. She referenced my estate projections in the LLC proposals, future inheritance positioning. His expression darkened. She used you, he said. Yes, I replied, indirectly. Daniel stood and paced the room again, but this time his movements were controlled. So this wasn't just about leaving, it was about upgrading. The word felt harsh, but accurate. I'm sorry, I said quietly. He stopped pacing. For what? For not seeing her clearly sooner. He shook his head. You trusted my judgment. I should have questioned the financial structure more aggressively. He walked toward me and placed a hand on my shoulder. You protected me, he said. That's what matters. In that moment, I realized something important. My role had shifted. I was no longer shielding a child. I was standing beside a man. The next morning, Emily's attorney contacted Robert. The tone was different than what I expected. Defensive, urgent. They had learned about the frozen accounts. Good. Pressure reveals intent. Daniel requested a full forensic review of every joint transaction over the past year. He wanted transparency not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. If there were more hidden arrangements, he needed to know. Over the next week, the truth unfolded in layers. Marcus Hale wasn't just an investor, he was married, and his wife had no idea. When that information surfaced, Daniel looked at me quietly. Should we tell her? He asked. I held his gaze. Truth has a way of finding people, but sometimes it needs a nudge. He understood, and for the first time since the lake house, I saw a flicker of something unexpected in him. Resolve. Not to hurt, but to close every loose thread, because unfinished betrayal has a way of resurfacing later. Emily attempted to call him several times that week. He didn't answer. Instead, all communication went through attorneys, structured, documented. She sent one final message late one night. "I never thought you'd choose him over me." Daniel read it out loud, then looked at me. "I didn't choose you," he said softly. "I chose reality." And that was when I knew he would be all right. Pain changes people, but so does clarity. The divorce proceedings moved forward quickly after the financial evidence was laid bare. Emily's leverage had evaporated the moment the accounts froze. Without access to the funds she'd quietly shifted, her negotiating position weakened. Marcus, facing exposure to his own family and investors, distanced himself. Partnerships built on secrecy rarely survive sunlight. One evening, Daniel joined me at the lake house again. The same dock, the same still water. "This place feels different now," he said. "It doesn't have to," I replied. He sat beside me, watching the ripples move across the surface. "You know," he said, "I keep thinking about that one phone call you made." "So do I." "If you'd called me first," he continued, "I might have defended her. I might have warned her. I might have given her time to hide things." "Yes," I said quietly. He nodded slowly. "You didn't react. You prepared." And that, more than anything, was the lesson. Emotion is natural, but action should be intentional. The sun began to set over Stillwater Lake, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and violet. For the first time since that afternoon, the place felt like mine again, not stained by betrayal, but strengthened by truth. Daniel stood after a while and looked out over the water. "I'll rebuild," he said. I believed him, because foundations built on honesty endure. And sometimes the calmest response becomes the most powerful one of them all.
The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just quiet in the way a house feels after a storm is past and you're left assessing the damage. Daniel moved back into his old bedroom temporarily. I didn't insist, and he didn't explain. Some wounds need familiar walls. The divorce process unfolded with a cold efficiency that surprised even me. Emily's attorney shifted tone once the financial evidence became undeniable. What had begun as subtle posturing quickly turned into negotiation. The LLC was dissolved under pressure. The transferred funds were largely recovered, though not without fees and legal friction. Marcus Hale, facing both exposure and potential civil complications, retreated like a man who suddenly realized risk wasn't as glamorous as it sounded. I never met him again, but I did make one more call. Not out of revenge, out of completion. I contacted Marcus's wife. Her name was Lillian. I did not dramatize the conversation. I did not embellish. I simply told her that her husband had been involved in an inappropriate relationship tied to financial arrangements that had now been legally addressed. I provided documentation through her attorney. There was silence on the other end for a long time. Then she said very calmly, "Thank you for telling me." Her voice didn't break. That told me she had already suspected something. Truth rarely arrives unannounced. It usually confirms a quiet fear someone has been carrying alone. When I hung up, I felt no triumph, only closure. Daniel asked me later if I regretted that call. "No," I said. "Secrets spread damage. Truth contains it." He nodded, though I could see he was still wrestling with his own internal questions. Betrayal doesn't just fracture trust in one person, it shakes your confidence in your own judgment. One evening, about a month after everything surfaced, Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table, reviewing new business proposals. He'd thrown himself into work, not as avoidance, but as reconstruction. "I've been thinking," he said. "That's usually productive," I replied. He almost smiled. "I let her handle too much. Not just financially, emotionally. I deferred decisions because it felt easier. That's common in partnerships, I said, especially when one person appears more organized. I mistook control for competence, he said quietly. That was an insight many never reach. He leaned back in his chair. I also kept trying to prove something to you. I raised an eyebrow. Prove what? That I could build something without just inheriting it. The honesty in his voice made me sit straighter. Daniel, I never wanted you to prove yourself to me. I wanted you to be secure. I know that now, he replied, but I think she sensed that pressure and she used it. He wasn't excusing her. He was understanding himself. That's growth. Do you hate her? I asked. He thought for a long moment. No, he said finally. I hate what she did, but I don't hate her. That answer told me he would not become bitter, and bitterness is the real inheritance fathers must guard against. The lake house slowly returned to being ours. We spent a weekend there together repairing small things that didn't actually need fixing. The dock boards were fine, the porch railing was sturdy, but rebuilding something with your hands after emotional damage has a symbolic weight to it. One afternoon, while we were sanding down a section of the railing, Daniel paused. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you just walked away that day? He asked. I have, I admitted. And? I think the money would have continued moving quietly. I think 6 months would have become a year, and I think you would have discovered it at the worst possible moment. He nodded slowly. Sometimes, I continued, the most loving act feels like interference. He set the sandpaper down and looked out at the lake. You didn't interfere, you intervened. There's a difference. Interference controls. Intervention protects. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, he turned to me and asked something I hadn't anticipated. Do you ever think about what happened to Marcus's wife? The question lingered in the air between us. I thought carefully before answering. In the beginning, I said, I wanted balance. He frowned slightly. What's the difference? Revenge seeks to cause pain equal to what you felt. Balance seeks to restore fairness. He considered that. Which did you choose? Balance. And that was true. Freezing the accounts wasn't about humiliating her. Calling Lillian wasn't about destroying Marcus. It was about preventing further damage. Revenge is loud. Balance is quiet. Daniel walked to the edge of the dock and stared into the water. I don't want this to define me, he said. It won't, I assured him, unless you let it. He turned back toward me and asked something I hadn't anticipated. Do you think I'll trust someone again? Yes, I said without hesitation. How can you be so sure? Because you're asking that question now instead of declaring you never will. He smiled faintly. Growth often arrives disguised as doubt. As the stars began to appear overhead, I realized something else. This story, painful as it was, had revealed more than betrayal. It revealed strength. Not in me, in him, and that mattered more than any asset recovered. But there was still one final conversation waiting to happen, one I had postponed intentionally, because even when a marriage ends, there are words left unsaid, and unfinished words have a way of lingering. A few days later, Emily requested a private meeting with me. Not with Daniel, with me, at the lake house. I almost refused, but something told me closure required one more calm conversation. When I told Daniel, he didn't argue. Be careful, he said simply. I assured him I would. As I drove north again, I couldn't help but reflect on how differently this road felt from the first time. That day had been shock and discovery. This day was resolution. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was already there. The same gravel, the same door. But this time, there would be no secrets waiting behind it. Only truth, and perhaps regret. When I stepped inside the lake house, Emily was standing near the window that overlooked the water. She had always liked that view. She once told me it made her feel like she was part of something steady, permanent. Now she looked smaller somehow. Not defeated exactly, but stripped of certainty. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly. I set my keys on the table and remained standing. "This won't take long." She nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air carried the faint scent of pine and old wood. It was strange how a place could witness both joy and fracture without changing at all. "I'm not here to fight or to ask for anything." "Then why are you here?" I asked calmly. She took a breath. "Because I need you to understand something." I waited. "I didn't marry Daniel for money," she said. "I loved him." "I believe you did," I replied. She looked surprised by that. "But love," I continued, "is proven through loyalty under pressure, not comfort." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry this time. "I felt small in your world, in your company, in your expectations. My expectations were simple: honesty, respect, commitment." "It never felt simple," she whispered. There it was again. Perception. "I watched Daniel constantly try to impress you. Every deal, every expansion. It was always about living up to what you built." "That was his choice, not my demand." She shook her head. "You don't see it. The weight of your legacy fills every room." I considered that. Perhaps there was truth in it, but legacy does not force betrayal. "It's easier to blame pressure than to admit ambition," I said gently. She didn't deny it. "Marcus made me feel powerful, like I wasn't just someone's wife in someone else's empire." "And so you decided to build your own empire using ours as scaffolding," I answered. Her jaw tightened slightly. "I made mistakes," she said. "Mistakes are accidents. You made decisions." Silence followed. Outside, the lake shimmered under late afternoon light. "Why did you call the lawyer instead of Daniel?" she asked after a moment. "Because emotion clouds judgment, and you were already operating strategically." I refused to respond carelessly. She nodded slowly. "I underestimated you," she admitted. "That was unwise," I said plainly. She actually let out a faint, humorless laugh. "If things ended," she continued, "I'd at least walk away secure." "You would have if I had arrived a few months later." Her eyes met mine then, and for the first time I saw something that looked like genuine remorse rather than fear. "You didn't think I'd act," she said. "I don't shout, I act." She folded her hands together. "Daniel left," she said quietly. I wasn't surprised. "When his wife found out?" I asked. She nodded. "He said it wasn't worth the fallout." "Partnerships built on secrecy rarely survive exposure," I said. She looked out at the water. "I lost everything," she whispered. I studied her carefully before answering. "No," I said calmly. "You chose risk, and you lost the gamble. There is a difference." She swallowed. "Do you hate me?" she asked. "No," I replied honestly, "but I will never trust you." That seemed to hurt more than anger would have. "I wanted you to respect me," she said. "Respect is earned through integrity, not image." She stood very still. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said after a long pause. "I know I don't deserve it. I just needed you to know I never meant to destroy him." I stepped closer to the window, looking out at the dock where Daniel once learned to cast a fishing line. "You didn't destroy him,"
I said quietly. You revealed him. She frowned slightly. He's stronger now than he was before because he understands the cost of blind trust. She absorbed that. And what about you? She asked softly. What did this cost you? That was a question I hadn't fully examined. It cost me an illusion, the illusion that building something solid protects it from being tested. She nodded. I suppose nothing is immune. No, I agreed, but some foundations survive. We stood there in silence for a long time. Finally, she picked up her purse. I'll finalize everything quietly, she said, no dragging it out. That would be wise, I replied. She walked toward the door, then hesitated. Tell Daniel, she began, then stopped. No, don't. I understood. Some apologies are meant to be carried privately. When the door closed behind her, the lake house felt lighter, not because the pain had vanished, but because there was nothing left unsaid. I stepped out on the dock alone. The wood creaked softly under my weight. I thought about that first day, the bedroom, the silence, the phone call. One calm decision had shifted the entire course of events, not with shouting, not with vengeance, but with clarity. And clarity, I've learned, is a quiet kind of power. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized there was only one thing left to do: move forward. Not as a man who had exposed betrayal, but as a father who had preserved his son's future. And that, above all, was worth the discomfort of truth.
The divorce was finalized 3 months later. No dramatic courtroom scenes, no public accusations, just signatures placed carefully on paper that dissolved what had once been promised as permanent. Emily left the city shortly after. I heard she moved south, took a consulting position with a mid-sized firm, started over quietly. Marcus remained in his own damaged marriage, though rumors suggested that silence in that house was heavier than any argument. Daniel didn't ask for updates. He didn't need them. The day the final documents arrived, he came into my office and placed them on my desk. He didn't look devastated. He looked steady. It's done, he said. I studied his face. There was sadness there. Of course there was. You don't erase years of shared life without residue. But there was also something else, something settled. Are you at peace with it? I asked. He considered the question carefully. I'm at peace with the truth, not with what happened, but with knowing. That answer mattered, because uncertainty corrodes far longer than pain does. We drove to the lake house that weekend without planning to. It had become our place again, not haunted, not tainted, just reclaimed. As we sat on the dock, Daniel skipped a stone across the water the way he used to as a boy. It didn't go far. He smiled faintly at that. I used to think strength meant never being blindsided, he said. And now, I asked. Now I think strength means responding well when you are. I looked at him with quiet pride. You were cheated on? I admitted. I laughed a soft laugh. No, but I've been betrayed in business more times than I care to count. The difference is, in business you expect risk. In love, you hope for safety. He nodded slowly. I keep replaying that day, he said. Not the affair, the part where you told me you called the lawyer first. I knew why that lingered with him. Are you angry? I asked. At first, he admitted, I thought maybe you were being cold, calculating. And now, he asked, now I understand that calm is not the absence of emotion, it's control over it. That was a lesson it had taken me decades to learn. When I walked into that bedroom, I said quietly,
I felt anger, disappointment, 100 impulses, but acting on impulse would have protected my pride, not your future. He absorbed that in silence. I think, he said after a moment, if you had yelled or confronted them, it would have become chaos. She might have hidden things better. I might have defended her blindly. Yes, I agreed. He looked out at the lake again. You gave me facts instead of fury, and that, more than anything, felt like the right legacy. Weeks turned into months. Daniel began restructuring his role in the company, not to prove anything anymore, but to build with intention. He reviewed contracts personally. He asked sharper questions. He no longer deferred uncomfortable conversations. Pain had refined him. One evening, over dinner, he surprised me. I met someone, he said. I didn't react dramatically. Tell me about her. She's an architect, smart, direct, doesn't care about the company. That sounds promising, I replied. He smiled. I told her everything, not details, but enough. And, he asked, she appreciated the honesty. Trust rebuilt slowly. That's how it should begin, I said. He grew quiet again, then added, I'm not rushing, I'm just open. Open. That word carried healing inside it. Later that night, after he'd gone home, I sat alone in my study and thought about everything that had unfolded. The lake house, the phone call, the documents spread across my desk, the confrontation, the divorce. If someone had asked me at the beginning whether I would ever be grateful for that painful discovery, I would have said no. But now, looking back, I understood something deeper. Betrayal is a revealer. It exposes character, both the betrayers and the betrayeds. Emily revealed ambition without integrity. Marcus revealed opportunism without loyalty. But Daniel revealed resilience, and I revealed something to myself as well. That power doesn't have to shout to be effective. That justice can be calm. That protection sometimes looks like interference from the outside. And most importantly, that love is not blind defense. It is courageous clarity. I walked out onto the back porch that evening, the city quiet around me. I thought about the man I was when I built that lake house, young, determined, focused on creating security for my family. I had always believed the greatest gift I could leave my son was wealth. Now I knew better. The greatest gift was discernment, the ability to pause before reacting, the discipline to seek truth before emotion, the courage to act without cruelty. That one phone call did not destroy a marriage, it prevented a deeper ruin. And if there is a lesson in all of this, it is simple. When betrayal knocks, you don't answer with rage, you answer with clarity. Because rage satisfies the moment, clarity protects the future. Daniel came by the next morning with coffee in hand. He looked lighter than he had in months. You know, he said, handing me the cup, I don't think of that day as the day my marriage ended anymore. No? I asked. He shook his head. I think of it as the day I stopped being naive. I nodded slowly. Growth rarely arrives comfortably, but when it arrives, it changes everything. We stood there in comfortable silence, and for the first time since that afternoon at the lake house, I felt complete peace.